Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to discuss multi-tier transparency. My name is Heidi Benko, and I'm responsible for product management and strategy at InfoNexus. And I'm joined here today for this particular topic with Brian Corelli, who runs our sustainability and partnerships. Perfect discussion for you, Brian.
Yeah, right on cue with us. So my role here at Nexus is really just to work with our customers to understand what they need in order to make their ESG and sustainability goals work for their company, to really get out there and understand more about what's pushing this in terms of regulations, what's kind of driving the market, and then try to find kind of creative ways here at Nexus to find smart products that can really kind of fill that little niche.
Little niche.
Yeah,
Becoming a big requirement.
that's true. More and more.
So today we're going to talk about kind of what's driving it, particularly regulations and, some of the challenges in really meeting these new expectations required of this multi-tier transparency. And it really goes beyond visibility to requiring greater data collection, as well as, collaboration with suppliers and tracing processes. And so we're here to talk about the challenges and opportunities, as well as, it's a new supply chain process and why supply chain business networks are critical. And also we'll talk about, how AI is really helping the process. That if you think about other industries that started traceability, say pharma, and how long it took, with some of these regulations, companies really don't have the time. They don't have years. So we're going to talk about how we kind of accelerate meeting these requirements.
Yeah.
All right, so let's start with some regulations. First, let's talk about some of the regulations that are really driving this requirement for multi-tier transparency. Which ones you primarily helping companies with today?
Yeah, so we said kind of like at the starting gun for this really was the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, the UFLPA here in the United States. That kind of got a lot of our customers, especially US-based ones, worried about mapping their supply chains, understanding where their goods came from, and was kind of the piece of legislation that kind of got out there very quickly, and was really driving the market originally. And that's still valid today. Customers are still out there preparing for it. It's a big risk thing, so you want to make sure that you de-risk your supply chain. So if you don't have a plan for UFLPA, that's where we come in and kind of help get your business grounded there, make sure that it's all working well. And then the big regulation that's kind of coming out of Europe right now that is more pressing is the EDR, which is the deforestation regulation. So that was supposed to be enacted at the end of this year in 2025. It got pushed, or 2024, got pushed out to December 2025. But that means that our customers are now trying to really figure out their game plan for how do we actually adhere to the regulation. It does require traceability all the way up to the farm. So you have to be able to actually show the plot of land where timber was felled for your product. And it also has wider range implications than you might think. It's, when you hear deforestation, you think wood, obviously, great, but it also covers palm oil, also covers rubber. Rubber is grown in trees, for example, and other things that are just kind of made as part of the textile manufacture process. So it has more of an impact on our customers than we were kind of expecting at first. They're working today to try to kind of come up with a game plan, and we've developed a product called NextTrace that helps you map your supply chain, but also trace where your goods came from, and it can get all the way up to that farm if you can get participation across your supplier base. So we're here to help. We're going through right now too and building out products that can help you comply with the regulations specifically. But in other kind of news too, there was the CS-Triple-D directive that is looking like it's going to get pushed out a little bit further. There's an omnibus reporting package that's being debated right now that is going to kind of really drive all this legislation. So there is a whole bunch of alphabet soup of regulation coming out of the EU. Businesses push back on it. This is kind of the normal ebb and flow of creating any regulation. Strong regulations come out, the business community kind of pushes back a little bit, and you try to kind of meet somewhere in the middle. That middle right now is kind of the omnibus is kind of driving that middle. So lots of different between the ESPR, the CSRD, the CS-Triple-D, CBAM, lots of reporting regulations were coming out, and the omnibus is supposed to make it easier for companies to comply, which is a good thing. We want standardization, so this is just probably good for the market, but kind of push those timelines out a little bit. But the EUDR is really going to be, kind of forceful. It's coming in this year as well.
Right. End of year is very soon. There's also the digital product passport, which kicks in 2027, which may sound far away,
Yeah.
But with the types of requirements that it has.
Yeah, so digital product passports, when we talk to customers, they believe if it's not today, it's going to be tomorrow. And if it's not tomorrow, it's going to be the next day after that. So at the end of the day, that really requires very, very complex traceability systems. You're going to be able to know not just where your products were made from in terms of like a life cycle assessment, but you'll have to know for this shirt, where did the goods actually come from, where the materials come from. So that requires a lot of sophistication. Our customers, some of them are getting prepared for this right now and really kind of doing their due diligence to first map their supply chains and start these kind of tracing paths. But they're learning, there's a lot you don't know. Any new supply chain process comes with a lot of kind of baggage around it while you kind of figure out how to optimize your supply chain around it, get suppliers used to it. So this is kind of still the learning phase to a certain degree, but if you're not starting to prepare for this now, it's probably going to be too late once the laws actually kind of get pushed out into force.
Right, and there's significant with these regulations, there's significant penalties, right? So it's either significant financial penalties or in some cases like digital product passports, you can't actually sell your goods into market. So it is very important for companies to comply, and it is a large lift to now connect multiple tiers of supply chains to collect this data and provide this transparency.
Totally. And then just one other note on that as well. Just very recently, the French eco design or eco labeling law is going to go into force as well. So in the same way that you might have seen like energy ratings on products here in the United States or other industries where you kind of have this like A, B, C, D, E rating, that's not how it's going to work. It's an actual score, a number. And how that score is determined takes a number of different inputs across a number of different factors from, wastewater to microfibers and microplastics within your products, all the way down to your scope 3 emission score. And part of the concern here is that if our customers are going to be, they're going to have to show that eco score on their product. And if they are unable to come up with that score through a life cycle assessment themselves, third parties can do it for them. And typically what we see out in the market is the type of software that does this, for example, for a scope 3 emissions calculation, they purposefully err on the side of caution. So typically it says, I have cotton that went into this product. Where was it sourced from? Well, typically that cotton, we believe on average uses this amount of emissions, carbon emissions to produce it. Well, there's a good chance that your supply chain might be more effective and more streamlined than a typical supply chain. And there's also a good chance that if they're erring on the side of caution, your eco score is going to come out a lot worse if you're not able to track this stuff. So this is a new law. We're still kind of waiting to see exactly how companies and how brands react to it. But you're going to want to be able to get in touch ahead of this. If you have a score that looks much worse than a competitor, it's because they've done the due diligence of going out and actually mapping their supply chains, understanding what went into making the shirt or whatever product you might have. Then you potentially, they could kind of look a little bit better than you, even though you might be doing better things in your supply chain. You might actually have a more sustainable supply chain. But because you didn't get to come to with that score yourself, that could be detrimental. So we're starting to try to prep customers for this. There's going to be a long runway with this. We'll see how the market and how consumers react to it. But if you're not starting to think about this today and measuring, you can just kind of see where the industry is going. You're going to be left behind.
So let's talk about, now that companies are, and some have already started on this journey, right? Mapping their supply chains, tracing. What are some of the challenges, right? Because this isn't, many companies have been dealing with their manufacturers, right? They're tier ones, but now it's tier 2, tier 3 and beyond. What are you seeing and there are companies at different phases. What are these challenges?
Yeah. So first and foremost, it's always supplier engagement. So at the end of the day, especially when you're talking about tracing and mapping supply chains, it's the actual suppliers who need to help you do this work. So first and foremost is just getting suppliers to engage, making sure they're educated and understand why you're doing this, and really coming to them and saying, this is kind of your chance to show that you are transparent, that you've got a clean and reputable supply chain, and trying to take the conversation from here's another requirement that you need to do into, hey, this could actually be good for your business too, suppliers. So trying to kind of get them to kind of understand that this is the new normal. You're going to be expected to do this every time you ship goods in the supply chain. We know that you weren't asked to before, and now you're going to be asked to do, especially in tiers 2 and 3, to just have a little bit more culpability. So this takes a long time. We've watched supply chains shift and move previously. Yeah. This is the kind of thing that usually goes over decades, not days. And we're going to be asked to do it in a shorter time frame than typical. We saw this go through with the farmer supply chain. They had to go through and digitize theirs and serialize it. It took 10 years to get there. We don't think that textiles are going to have quite as much leeway because they're coming under such scrutiny. So if you're not really prepared to do this, you're going to need to start doing so. So understanding to work with your suppliers is one of the big challenges that we see. Make sure that they're actually able to do it. The other problem too that we see is, at the end of the day, this is going to incur costs. There's just no getting around it. You're asked to do more than you were previously. So how do we work with these teams in order to drive that cost down for the suppliers themselves, as well as for the brands, and then to make it easy so that you're doing one type of reporting instead of many types of reporting. So part of the challenges we see is suppliers coming to us and saying, we have to give this data in 15 different formats for 50 different systems. Why? So at Nexus, part of my responsibility is partnerships as well. We're trying to see, can we find other partners and other people and other systems, like the Surpass group is doing really good work to try to standardize around what digital product passports deliver, for example. So we're trying to participate in that, and we're members of that, and trying to work with other businesses as well and other companies just to understand how can we come up with like one data format, one system to really lower the amount that we ask suppliers to do. And at Nexus, this is one of our strengths. We, are very good at taking in a single data feed and then spreading that out across multiple systems. We do a lot of mapping and changing of data and transforming of data. So this kind of speaks to us. And what we're looking for is how can we make it easy for suppliers to give one input that we can fan out to many of our customer systems, as well as to regulation systems and others as well.
All right, so we talked about making it easier for suppliers, and you said one place and share with others. I mean, that's the thing. It's a network.
Yep.
And a multi-enterprise supply chain business network versus an individual enterprise portal is
Totally.
one of those critical components.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things, and this is why we feel like we're in a really good place to help, is when you think about multi-tier transparency and tracing. If you're in tier 3, tier 4, you don't know where your products are going to end up often. I don't know if it's going to go to, it's brand A or brand B. I might not even know if it's going to go into a shirt or a couch if it's textiles. So part of the challenge there is in traditional software systems, especially with SaaS software, you have tenants. So you have to say, I'm doing this work, or I'm entering this traceability data for this brand, this traceability platform, or their instance of it. Well, that doesn't really work if you don't know which brand the goods are going to. So one of the advantages we have at Nexus is we are a true single instance multi-enterprise network. Every business is on once and only once. And if you're a supplier, this makes it a little bit easier. Instead of having to log into 20 or 50 systems, you log into one, you get the data in one way, and then we can flow that out to potentially hundreds of brands. So we think we're very well positioned here. And honestly, it feels like the network that we built is going to probably see kind of its best use case almost that we've seen in 25 years, which is today it does a great job of connecting, logistics providers and brands and suppliers across the supply chain. But when you go multi-tier with that and you're getting tier 2s, tier 3s, and so on, you just get a better picture of where your data's go, where your products are going. And you can start to see, kind of trends within the data itself. And then also if you're going to have stockouts or can't short supply, well, if you're watching the signals come in much earlier, because you can start seeing them in tier 3 and start watching goods flow into your supply chain, then you can start getting better insights into that too. So it's not all bad, like often you get regulation and people say, oh, this is more work to do. It's more expensive, but sometimes you get better insights. And part of this is because you're going to change the way suppliers behave. You're going to get more information from them. You can use that to your benefit. So it's not all bad.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a great way to look at it, because there's a lot of data that companies have wanted what's going on in upper tiers, but getting that connectivity has been a problem, that information sharing. And now regulations are driving the requirements.
Yeah.
And first is connecting, and then actually, collecting the data. But the other thing is making it easier, which, just like we were saying with regulations and looking at pharma and others, companies now, things like digital product passport, don't have that luxury of time. Not that it's a luxury, but AI's come a long way. If you think about how you're going to get this data from the suppliers and from the systems, you cannot do all those point-to-point integrations, and you can't have the suppliers turning from one system to another and keying in it. It's just not scalable, right? So that's where AI is really going to make a difference.
It already is, which is just awesome. So AI, I'm sure we're all sick of hearing it at this point, and it's because you hear a lot of kind of grandiose, just kind of presentations about how AI is going to change your world, and sometimes it's just the little stuff. So we built a really good piece of technology here at Nexus called the Smart Importer. When we talked to suppliers, we said, what is your challenge when you're getting data into these systems? They said, we have to hand key a lot of this stuff, and we go and run reports out of our systems, and then we have to hire a new person or people or a whole staff and then take those reports and input them into other systems. And we said to the suppliers, well, what if we just took that report directly and told you the fields that we need to capture within Nextrace, and then you are able to upload it once and then continuously just give us that same report over and over again. And Smart Import is able to do that. And part of the magic of how we were able to get this up and running so quickly is through AI and large language models, LLMs like ChatGPT and Anthropic. So we've gone through and we've built a process where if you upload a spreadsheet, we can look at the columns that we want, or the fields that we look to capture, and the columns that you have, and we can do a very smart match based on the language within those and even the data type within those. And then we can just use AI to do smart things like today where, if you're taking in one language, we can export that to many more languages. So if you're a supplier in Vietnam and you upload that data, you probably are using, Vietnamese as your column headers. Well, with an LLM and AI, you can very quickly get a translation on that, which
Yeah.
previously would be much more difficult, especially if it's data that we don't know. So that's one way that we can do smart things. And we also have a really smart piece of technology called a lot crawler that says, if we saw goods go outbound with this lot and you uploaded data from a production order at tier 3, and we see a material receipt come in at tier 2, and you have that same either batch or lot or serial number, we can intelligently, using AI, connect those transactions themselves so the suppliers don't have to do it as well. So reduce time for suppliers, reduce complexity, use AI to do smart things like, use the application in your own language, find ties in data that we might not have found before, and don't ask the user to do it. Do this, kind of do this inherently within the system. So it's been really fun, just getting things like, we built a document or an application to scan transaction certificates. So the kind of thing, if we did we use optical character recognition to do this typically in the industry, it was expensive, it was time consuming, and it wasn't very accurate. LLMs have turned that on its head. We go train it against a bunch of these transaction certificates. It starts to know exactly what the data looks like. We can pick that up immediately. And now instead of the user and having someone in the supplier typing this data in, we just pull it all out from there. We were able to spin that up in like weeks, not years. So it's been really, really fun to watch it work.
It's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, companies today don't have a digital supply chain with their media tiers. Like you mentioned, companies today connect with their logistics suppliers, their logistics providers, their suppliers, manufacturers. Most of that is still emails and spreadsheets
Mm-hmm.
with just tier ones, right? And really the supply chains they're directly managing. And now with things like digital product passport, the word digital, that has to be data. So it has to be data. So now that you have to take all of this data and documents out of multiple tiers of suppliers, connections, and systems and make it digital. And that's why, large language models are really going to enable this.
Yeah, they
It
can
won't
pull
really be
together.
possible.
So today, I know we get so many customers that are capturing traceability information. They're doing it in spreadsheets and emails. Well, we can now take that same spreadsheet you were getting in there, put it into a system that is smart enough to know the data because it's seen it before and sees it over and over again. And instead of someone recording this and trying to figure it out, we can literally throw a machine to do it at it. So it's the efficiencies are huge. This is where you start hearing about things like AI is going to cause a huge productivity boom. We're starting to see the early returns in this, which is exciting, but we got a long way to go.
Yeah. Yes, it's just the beginning for sure. Absolutely. So and we were talking about, you mentioned mapping and tracing, right? And there are mapping solutions good for understanding multiple tiers of suppliers, but why is it also important to start tracing, even if, companies aren't dealing with specific regulations today?
Yeah. So most of our customers are doing some form of mapping their supply chain, often up to tier 2. Some go further than that. That's great. And that's good. You're going to continue to do this. But at the end of the day, mapping is you're trusting your suppliers to tell you who they work with. You want them to do that. You should trust your suppliers. That's great. So we have a whole component that does that. But then at the end of the day, you should trust, but you should also verify. And what we're seeing is there's kind of a 1-2 punch. So map your supply chain and get your suppliers to declare who they work with. And then as we load traceability data into the system, we can actually verify that they not only work together, but what were the products and materials that they were transferring between the two of them? How often do they work together? How much supply goes between the two? So you get kind of better metrics that way. And tracing is verifying. Once you've actually traced goods and you've watched them flow through the supply chain, you've gone and taken that declaration and it's now true. And that gives you kind of this self-reinforcing map as well. And it's kind of this like yin and yang, if you will. Map it out, go try to figure out where the nodes are, trace it to see how relevant they are, how common they are, and how often those two supply chains work together. And then you can start pulling in this much larger, broader picture. Once you have more of that data, especially on the traceability side, you can start doing some of those things we talked about earlier, where you can see assurance of supply and stock and start making better decisions. We're also looking at, as our customers learn more about their supply chain, can they find efficiencies within their own supply chain to make things more geographically integrated or verticalized? So, hey, we see that you've got a lot of material manufacturers in Vietnam. They're passing goods along to each other like crazy, but sometimes they ship this stuff over to another country and back to do other processing. Well, do you have a supplier in Vietnam that you can use instead? That would lower your carbon footprint for your product. It'd be better for the environment and probably cheaper for your supply chain. Every time you're sending stuff halfway across the world, someone's eating that cost, and eventually it's the brand, most likely, and the consumer. So why not cut that cost out and just be better both for the planet and for your bottom line too?
So, no, this has been great. So I guess, with the viewers that we have today, what other suggestions? What would you have as suggestions for companies on traceability and transparency?
So today, and this has been our advice from the start, is start if you're not started today. If you are started today, that's great. Learn your lessons and start figuring out how you can trace more. What we've been talking with customers, and it's true, is like today we're tracing small amounts of goods, usually high value or things that can meet product claims like organic cotton or whatever else it might be. But tomorrow we want to get to tracing more and more of the goods within your supply chain and more of the materials within the goods that you're manufacturing. And eventually we want to get to tracing everything everywhere all at once. That is our goal. Our customers have stated the same goal. So to get there, which is the end state, you've got to go, if you have to run a marathon, you have to start with your first step. So get out there and start working today. Start understanding who your supply chain partners are that are willing to participate. Start learning with them. You're going to have to build teams to do this. I hate to say it, but it's true. So the customers who are doing a great job of this today took it seriously day one. They built in traceability teams and they have people on their organizations who are responsible for this. They know that this comes under their umbrella and they're good at it. They started actually learning with this and you start getting experience. Those teams will continue to grow and flourish as you go and start tracing more goods with your suppliers. You also start building out those relationships with suppliers and see who will comply and who won't. This gives you the opportunity to reevaluate. You can start using this in your supplier scoring system. Are you actually able to trace? That is key. If you don't start that work now, it's going to take you much longer to get those signals on who's good and who's not in general. And then finally, just really, I try to encourage everybody here, but try to take as much of an empathetic view of the supplier as you can. So suppliers are asked to do a lot already. We know this. This is another pretty big burden for them to bear. So try to empathize with them, try to work with them, understand what they can and can't do, what's easy for them to do, what's difficult for them to do. Try to standardize it across your teams as well. We often see customers where different teams within the organization is asking different information from suppliers at different times. As funny as it sounds, if you can find efficiencies and do that all at once, if you ask suppliers 50 questions at once, you're going to get better, more accurate answers than if you ask one question 50 times kind of thing. So can we start to find smart ways to do this? It makes it easier on the suppliers, gets better compliance, drives better results, and eventually you can comply with the regulation too.
And so companies that are actually using systems to trace now, and even if it's like for things like UFLPA, which is only if you're stopped, then you have to provide the tracing. If you're trying to connect with multiple tiers and emails and spreadsheets and don't have a process versus a system,
Yeah.
it's going to take a lot of time, right?
We saw that ourselves. So we had a customer who went live with NextTrace. They had a previous UFLPA violation the year before, and it took them months to be able to gather the documentation because you're asking your tier one, go back and gather all of this chain of custody data. This is for a UFLPA violation. Gather all of this data and then package it all up and get it off to Customs and Border Protection. That took something along the lines of like 4 months to gather. It's crazy. When we went and rolled out our software, because you already had direct connections to these suppliers, because you're able to pull the data in, they were able to gather 150 different pieces of evidence in less than 10 days, which is remarkable. So you've gone from, and this is how it works, when you're hounding people with emails and the suppliers aren't used to tracing, they don't know that they need to do this, it's going to take them a lot longer to comply, and especially when they're kind of caught flat-footed. When you have an application that they've already used, they understand how this works, they come in, they give the data, you can upload it so much more quickly and efficiently, causes less stress. It's also less stressful for the supplier at the end of the day. Suppliers and supply chains work on efficiency and predictability. When all of a sudden you say, well, go do this research project for me to go find a whole bunch of supporting evidence for a UFLPA violation, that's a lot of work. When you say, here's the thing you've been doing all the time anyway, just give us more of that data, it's a lot easier to do. So we were really happy with it. It's nice that it kind of gives some assurance of risk to our to our customers as well. If you do get a violation, you've got kind of this safety net that you can use.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
Way to respond.
Yeah, it's great. It's awesome.
Digital process.
Yeah.
So just wrapping up, I hope everyone's learned a lot today. I mean, I think regulations are here, not going anywhere, even if some push. The need for multi-tier transparency and that connectivity is here. And it really is an extension of supply chain processes, right? I know there's, people sometimes think traceability and a lot of the data requirements for these regulations. Oh, I have to collect all the CSG data from suppliers and others. But yes, that is an extension of the supply chain process. So, really put that supply chain mindset. How are you going to now take that next tier and next tier operational process.
Yeah, exactly. And today, we're gathering a lot of traceability data. Tomorrow, it's Scope 3 data, wastewater data, better ESG, social governance practices. The nice thing is what we've built here is really an engine to engage with your suppliers. And really what we're looking at is, how can we get more and better quality information from suppliers to eventually to consumers, to the brands themselves, so they can make better decisions. We're just starting. It's going really, really well. So far, so good. But we got a long way to go.
Thank you, Brian, for your time today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, Heidi. It's been great.